Hello, and welcome to this edition of UK Paranormal Files. In this episode, we will look at the Ilkley Moor Alien Encounter, which took place in the late 80s in the Yorkshire countryside, North England. After 4 years working as a policeman in London, the man central to this story left his job and with his wife and young baby moved to West Yorkshire to be closer to her family. The man in question, in recounting his story, has always wished to remain anonymous, and for the purposes of relaying his story, we too shall refer to him by the accepted pseudonym of Philip Spencer. It was the 1st of December 1987, and at 7:15 in the morning, Mr. Spencer said goodbye to his wife and set off on foot from their home. He was heading to meet his father-in-law in the village of East Morton, and to get there he was to walk across Ilkley Moors. Mr. Spencer had his camera with him, as he had hoped to get some photographs of some strange tricks of light he had heard about on the moors. For those not familiar with Yorkshire and England, it is worth pausing to note that the weather there would not be good in December, and at 7:15 in the morning it would still be dark, with low light conditions for the next hour, and perhaps longer with the cloud cover and fog. Mr. Spencer had a high ASA rated film in his camera to compensate for the low light conditions, and he also carried a compass, knowing that fog would be a feature of this trek. Despite the Spencer family having only lived here for a few months, he was an experienced and keen walker and had explored the rural locality. It was whilst en route on this day, walking one of the steep slopes of Ilkley Moors, that he made the decision to deviate from the usual course he would take in favour of a shorter route that would prove a little more arduous. He headed along a steep pathway past some trees when he became aware of a low humming sound. He took it to be the faint sound of an aircraft, to which he could not see for the weather conditions. Aeroplanes not being too uncommon in the region, there was nothing unusual in this and the most likely assumption. The crown of this particular hill had long ago been partially scooped out, and so the path dipped a little before skirting around the lip. It was here that something caught Philip Spencer's eye. Something that was moving. In turning his gaze, Mr. Spencer could make out, at a distance of about 30 feet away, a creature approximately 4 feet in height. It appeared green in colour and was moving on 2 legs. It was moving away from him, and he observed it for a few seconds, all the while trying to make sense out of what he was seeing. When the creature had moved about 50 feet away, Mr. Spencer cried out, "Hey!" The being turned and looked back at Mr. Spencer. It waved its arm dismissively. It was at this point that Mr. Spencer's mind prompted him that he had a camera with him and he should take a photograph. He took one shot and he captured an image of the creature. Here is that picture, and in the following frames, some close-ups. The creature moved out of sight behind the outcropping, and so Mr. Spencer moved into pursuit. He rounded the corner, but the creature could not be seen. However, he had arrived just in time to see a large saucer-shaped object with a dome on top move briskly out of sight and into the cloud cover. He described the craft as having a whitish dome atop of it, with patterns of holes cut into it. In the time between rounding the corner to the object disappearing, there had not been enough time to reset and get a photograph. It was now he realised that the humming he had heard was in fact this object, and as it flew out of sight, the moors fell silent. Mr. Spencer later recalled that he had acted out of instinct in making the pursuit. One is left to wonder if his training as a police officer was a factor in compelling him into this spur-of-the-moment decision. He later described the creature as not so much walking and had shambled, but despite this, it had moved quickly, too quickly for its pursuer, and likely faster than any human being. It seemed the being had disappeared in the craft, and there was nothing more to see. Mr. Spencer was shaken by the sighting and abandoned his plan to head to his father-in-law's house, and instead opted to head to Menston, which was the nearest village. The walk there took 30 minutes. 30 minutes alone with his thoughts. Upon arriving in Menston, he was shocked to see the streets were full of shoppers at such an early hour. Until that was, when he glanced up at the church clock and saw that it was now 10 a.m. Mr. Spencer had reckoned he had only set off an hour before, and to his mind the time was only 8:15 a.m. He noticed another anomaly. The compass he was carrying had seemed to reverse its polarity. It was pointing south when it should have been pointing north. He was confused. Doubt crept into his mind, and he began to wonder if he had really seen what he thought he had. Where had the time gone this morning? The answer was in his camera. Younger viewers may not be aware how personal cameras functioned in the 1980s, so I offer a quick side comment so the context of Mr. Spencer's next move makes sense for all. Before digital cameras and smartphones, cameras captured images on film negatives. To convert negative images into tangible printed pictures required specialist equipment and chemicals, and so when a roll of film was used up, or was deemed ready, you rolled the film into the protective casing to protect it from sunlight, and took it either to a chemist or a specialist photo development store. At this point in the story, Mr. Spencer realised that to start to make sense of everything that had happened, he would need to get his film developed. He got onto a bus and headed for the town of Keighley, which had the nearest instant photo development facilities in the area. 2 hours later, which kids was a quick turnaround for the time, he had the photo of the creature in his hands. He knew now for sure this was no hallucination. He had something tangible. A short time after the event, Mr. Spencer decided to reach out to a UFO researcher, and so, this being the pre-internet era, he headed to a local library where he managed to find the address of a researcher by the name of Jenny Randalls. He wrote Randalls a letter detailing his account. Randalls, in turn, put Spencer in touch with Peter Hoff, and Spencer agreed to participate in an in-depth investigation. Eventually, a third investigator, a writer by the name of Arthur Tomlinson, also joined the investigation team. Hoff and Randalls were initially very sceptical about the claims, if only that in their field this started out as an almost too good to be true situation. Despite their caution, in short order they began to find it difficult to doubt the man's account, his integrity, his training as a police officer, as a trained observer, plus the icing on the cake, the photograph. Randalls examined the rest of the shots on the film and found them to be consistent with the story, and no evidence in any of the other pictures that practice photos had been attempted. With nothing in the preliminary findings to lead Randalls or Hoff to doubt the man or the photo, they sought to involve further people in the investigation. This was agreed by Mr. Spencer on the condition of anonymity. It was at this point Hoff established the pseudonym of Philip Spencer. It was also at this juncture that Mr. Spencer firmly established with the team that he sought no profit from the story or the picture. His only motive was to see to it that his encounter would be fully investigated. An unnamed expert on animal photography was the first expert to be engaged. He concluded that the photo represented a creature of unknown determination, and through simple observation of the photo, it was impossible to ascertain if it was a living being or not. A recreation at the site was organised, and it was established there that whatever the creature was, it was indeed approximately 4 to 4.5 feet tall. Next, the photo and negative was sent to the Kodak Corporation in Hemel Hempstead to be examined by an expert named Peter Soverhurst. After 2 weeks of investigation, he concluded that the negative was a first exposure and had not been interfered with. Thus, his conclusion was the creature was a part of the original photo and not superimposed in his opinion. It was also his opinion that there was no way to increase or enhance the image to be any clearer. The picture was then sent to Dr. Bruce Maccabee, who was an optical physicist for the United States Navy. He was asked to perform computer enhancement and analysis. Dr. Maccabee concluded regretfully that the slow film speed and low light conditions had rendered the film too grainy for proper testing, and is quoted as stating that, "I had great hopes that this case would prove definitive. Sadly, circumstances prevent it from being so." Despite one of the main priorities of the investigation being to protect Mr. Spencer's true identity, the man in question came to be concerned when, about 6 weeks into the investigation, he answered a knock to the front door of his home. Two men, dressed in typical Men in Black fashion, had arrived to talk to him about his encounter. Mr. Spencer had only personally discussed the matter with his wife and the three investigators, so the fact that anybody had arrived to speak to him about it was unnerving. The men identified themselves as being Ministry of Defence intelligence officers, and they showed credentials naming themselves as Agents Jefferson and Davis. Upon seeing legitimate appearing credentials, he tentatively invited the two men into his home. It was quickly apparent that the visitors were very well versed in the case, and asked him several questions about what he remembered about the encounter. Mr. Spencer, still unnerved, tried to cautiously answer as best as he could, for fear of offending the government officials. He did want to show due respect. But the conversation soon became centred around the photograph, to which he claimed to have lent to a friend. It was in fact with investigator Hoff at this time. Upon learning the photo was not present in the house, the agents seemed to quickly lose interest, and shortly thereafter they departed. In 1987, the stereotype of Men in Black had not seeped into the public psyche as widely as it has in the past 2 decades, and yet here we have a case of their insertion into a classic case file. In February 1988, investigator Hoff took the compass to Dr. Spooner at Manchester University. The doctor was the head of the university's department for electrical engineering, and Hoff wanted to establish if Dr. Spooner could explain how the compass could have come to have had its polarity reversed. Dr. Spooner agreed, but stipulated there would be no way for him to confirm that the change to the compass occurred at the time and the place of Mr. Spencer's account. Testing started by exposing similar compasses to magnetic fields to alter their readings, but they found that soon afterwards the compasses generally reverted to their original function and there had been no lasting effect. The team did conclude that exposure to a magnetic resonance scanner did in fact duplicate the effect. However, such a device was hardly commonplace, and it was concluded to be unlikely such a device would have been the cause. The team discovered that by replicating a potentially life-threatening scenario of domestic electrical shock, the effect could be observed. But the chances of someone wanting to willingly undergo such a dangerous action was deemed implausible. Dr. Spooner concluded that the minimum field required is equal to 2,000 times the flux of the Earth's natural field strength, and that should such a force have ever been present at any place and any time, it should still be detectable in the local rocks. It was checked by investigator Hoff, and no magnetism or elevated radiation was detectable at the site. There must have been a lot for Philip Spencer to process in his mind over these weeks and months. The self-doubt, the wonder of what was at the bottom of it all, and perhaps even a healthy dose of questioning his own recollection and personal sanity. By late February he was still none the wiser. He still didn't know what had happened during his missing time. He started to have recurring dreams about starry skies. The investigative team arranged for Mr. Spencer to meet with a clinical psychologist in Preston, Dr. Jim Singleton. It was Dr. Singleton's conclusion that Mr. Spencer was in fact recounting the truth of what he had observed, as he knew it. It was agreed the final test would be a session of regressive hypnosis. The session took place in the home of Arthur Tomlinson on March 16, 1988, and was led by Dr. Singleton. Also present were investigator Hoff and a journalist colleague of his, Matthew Hill. Hill operated 3 tape recorders to capture the session. As the regressive memories came to the surface, it was now that Mr. Spencer was able to recall what had happened during the missing time. He could now recall that he had been taken on board a spaceship, where he underwent some medical-style procedures before being released. It was also now that he came to realise that the conscious sighting he had had of the being on the moors, this had taken place after he had left the craft, when he had been returned. What follows is an account taken from the transcript of that session. Singleton, I want you to cast your mind back to the 1st of December last year, when you set off across the moor. I want you to clear your mind back, and I want you to re-experience that. I want you to tell me what you experienced. Spencer, I'm walking along the moor. Oh, it's quite windy. There are a lot of clouds. Walking up towards some trees, I see this little something. I can't tell, but he's green and it's moving up towards me. Oh, I'm stuck. I can't move. And the creature is still coming towards me. I'm stuck and everything's gone fuzzy. I'm floating along in the air. I want to get down. I still can't get down and I don't like it. I'm going around this corner and this green thing is in front of me. Oh God, I want to get down. There's a big silver saucer thing. There's a door in it. And I don't want to go in there. Everything gone black now. Singleton, you say everything has gone black? Spencer, I can't see anything, like I'm asleep. Can't hear anything. There's a bright light now. Can't see where it's coming from. I'm in a funny sort of room. I can hear this voice saying, "Don't be afraid." I don't feel afraid anymore. I can still see this green thing, but I'm not afraid of it anymore. I'm being put on a table. I can move now if I want to, but I don't feel frightened anymore, and there's a beam like a pole. It's above me. It's moving up towards me. It's got a light in it like a fluorescent tube. It's coming up from my feet. I can hear that voice again saying, "We don't mean to harm you, and don't be afraid." Makes me feel warm as it moves up me. It's coming up over my stomach towards my head. I close my eyes. I don't want to look at it in case it hurts my eyes. It's gone. There's something. My nose feels funny. That's gone as well. I'm standing up now. I don't know how I got stood up. I can see a door. There is one of those green creatures motioning for me to come with him. Don't really want to go with him. I'd rather stay here. I don't feel afraid in here. Singleton, can you tell me what's happening now? Spencer, I'm walking towards a door. There is still a bright light. There is light all around. I want to know where it's coming from. It's just bright all around. Walking down a corridor, there is a window. Oh God, is that real? I don't want to be up here. I want to be down there. I can hear that voice again saying, "You've got nothing to fear." It's pretty though. I didn't realise it looked so pretty. I've gone past the window now. I'm walking down a corridor. Singleton, what's happening now? Spencer, come to the end of the corridor. There's a hole opened in it so I can walk through. I'm in a big room, a big round room. I'm on a raised platform against the wall. My camera and compass are trying to get away from me, going towards the ball. It's difficult to pull them back down again, and this ball's moved around with strange... It's got some blocks on it. He says we can't stay here too long. He wants us to go out again. The hole's closed in the wall. It's gone strange. He says, "I've got nothing to fear, but I'd still like to go home." It's got such big hands. Singleton, what's happening now? Spencer, going down a corridor again. It's still very bright and I wish I knew where the light was coming from. There is another door. Going through a door. It's an empty room. Two of those green creatures have come with me. There's a picture. It's starting to move on the wall. I wonder how they get the pictures. Singleton, can you tell me what's happening at this point? Spencer, I'm looking at the pictures on the wall. Singleton, pictures on the wall? Spencer, the creatures seem to be concerned at the damage that it's doing. Picture changing now. There's another picture, another film. He's asking me a question. He says, "Do you understand?" I said, "Yes." It's time to go. Everything's gone black. I'm walking up the moor again. I'm walking near some trees. Some movement. I can see something. A green creature. I've shouted to it. It's turned around. I don't know what it is. I'll photograph it. It's turned back around now. It's moving quickly. I want to know what it is. I'm running after it. It's gone round a corner. I can't see it now. There is a saucer. A big silver saucer. It's disappeared. I'm walking on down. Gone past the trees. Singleton, what's happening now? Spencer, I'm going home. It's 10 o'clock on the town hall clock. Can't really understand. It was only 8 o'clock. Singleton, you mentioned some green creatures. Would you try to describe them to me? Spencer, it's quite small. He's got big pointed ears. It's got big eyes. They're quite dark. He hasn't got a nose, and he's only got a little mouth. His hands are enormous, and his arms are long. He's got funny feet. Singleton, funny feet? Spencer, they're like a V shape, like two big toes. Must be difficult to walk like that. He shuffles rather than walks. I don't feel afraid of him, although he looks odd. Singleton, you mentioned big hands. Can you say any more about the hands? Spencer, it's got 3 big fingers, like sausages. Big sausages. They're just very big. Bigger than my hands. Singleton, about how tall would you say these creatures are? Spencer, it's about 4 foot. Comes up to the lump on my stomach. He's about as high as, just a bit bigger than my stomach is. Singleton, okay, now I wonder if I can ask you another question. You mentioned a film. Spencer, there were 2 films. Singleton, 2 films? Spencer, one was lots of scenes of destruction, like on the news. Can see lots of waste going into the river, and people like Ethiopians who are starving. It's not very good. It's not very nice. Singleton, do you want to say anything more about that film? Spencer, it's much of the same thing, only different. Singleton, what about the other film then? Do you want to tell me about it? Spencer, I'm not supposed to. Singleton, I'll leave that up to you entirely. Do you want to say anything about that? Spencer: I'm not supposed to tell anyone about the other film. It's not for them to know. Singleton: Is there anything more? Spencer: No. There was a lot of new information to come out of this session. Let's take a look at what we now know. The missing time Mr. Spencer had experienced had occurred because he had been abducted and taken on board their vessel. This vessel then left Earth's atmosphere, and Mr. Spencer witnessed being in orbit. The creatures were able to detain him using some kind of field, which also levitated him off the ground. They performed a medical analysis on him, but they seemed to want to reassure him to not be afraid. And despite being an estimated 4 to 4.5 feet tall, Mr. Spencer seemed to be able to walk around the vessel. He made no mention of a lack of headroom. He made no comment about not being able to breathe without assistance. The environment seemed okay for him. Was the craft therefore built with human visitation and interaction in mind? There were rooms and corridors. The impression I got was, the vessel is big. Mr. Spencer makes mention of his nose feeling funny, then not. Was this a simple part of the examination, or is it possible this was the implanting or removal of alien technology, perhaps a tagging device? Mr. Spencer recalls going into a bright room where there is a big ball. Is this the engine room of the ship and the technology that powers it, or perhaps the propulsion system? Was it the ball or something else in the room that has, quote, got some blocks on it? Whatever the technology was, it seemed to have a magnetic or gravitational pull on his camera and compass. Did this technology reverse the polarity of Mr. Spencer's compass? If so, why did it not have an effect on the film negative in Mr. Spencer's camera? Is this a proof point about the kind of energy this technology uses? Some kind of magnetic or gravitational resonance, but with no radiation? The alien didn't want Mr. Spencer to be afraid of the technology, but he also didn't want them to be in there too long. The creatures, or aliens, seem to be 4 to 4.5 feet tall, have large extremities, 3 fingers, 2 toes. Mr. Spencer makes no comment about how similar or different they appear to one another. They have pointed ears, large dark eyes, and only a small mouth. Mr. Spencer is led into a room where he is shown 2 moving pictures, but he doesn't describe it like watching television or a movie. He says, "There's a picture. It's starting to move on the wall." Is this just a clumsy description? Is this perhaps how someone from the 1980s might describe seeing a flat screen television for the first time? Whatever these moving pictures were, the creatures seemed concerned about it. Was there a message for Mr. Spencer in there? Or perhaps for humanity? Mr. Spencer says, "He's asking me a question." He says, "Do you understand?" I say, "Yes." What was that question? We've learned that Mr. Spencer took his photograph after the abduction, not before. This would prove to be a key revelation. One of Investigator Hoff's doubts about the case was the lighting in the original photograph. It didn't fit the early hour and lighting conditions. This was his chief doubt about Mr. Spencer's story. If the photo was actually taken 1 hour later, the presumed lighting conditions would now match for that date and time. I think you'll agree, this is a rather remarkable case. And before I tender my own conclusions, I think this is as suitable a place as any for me to pause briefly and ask if you've enjoyed this video so far, and if you have not done so already, please give the video a like and a share. If you'd like to see more videos from me, please subscribe to the UK Paranormal Files channel. Please also feel free to leave a comment around any aspect of this case, or if you prefer, give me a suggestion on any future videos you'd like to see me make. Now, getting back to the case in hand, I'd like to offer 2 discussion points. These centre around open questions I have about this case. Let's make an assumption. Let's assume Mr. Spencer is telling the truth, and he has had an encounter with a technologically more advanced race of beings. They took him on board their vessel. They studied him. They reassured him that, despite his abduction, he had nothing to fear. They showed him advanced technology. They showed him he was in orbit of the Earth. They show him messages of concern about poverty and pollution. They show him a personal message that is for him only. And then they return him to Earth and wipe his memory. But not before stopping for a photograph. What is anyone, let alone Mr. Spencer, to make of this? Let's look at a different discussion point and a new set of assumptions. The size of the ship being able to accommodate human-sized passengers, the atmosphere being breathable, the friendly reassurances, the demonstration of advanced technology, and the message of concern, all indicate that these are friendly beings. They may wish to give us a message of hope or offer humanity some direction. So why just the one case? If they've been observing Earth and our cultures, they must know that Mr. Spencer would be in no position to communicate their message widely and effectively. So what was the purpose? Why Mr. Spencer? Why not a top scientist or a political leader? Or perhaps that's the counterpoint. We don't really know who Mr. Spencer is, but maybe they did. And maybe today he is a person of great influence. And although that is speculation, if it's true, how many other people were visited that are today people of great influence? And will we ever know? It's time for me to share my conclusions. I do leave open a number of questions which we've just discussed. But despite these, I don't believe there's any way Mr. Spencer or the investigators could have bridged those doubts. There are many elements of this encounter that are similar to other documented alien abduction stories. Mr. Spencer should be credited for immediately seeking out an investigation. There is no question here of many years or decades passing. The investigation team seem to have been very diligent. They seem to have been balanced, open-minded, yet sceptical. And their investigation failed to debunk Mr. Spencer's account. Mr. Spencer, somewhat uniquely, has physical evidence. He has the photo. He has the compass. I do believe Mr. Spencer's account. At the end of each episode of UK Paranormal Files, we will look at the credibility dial as shown on screen. For the Ilkley Moor Alien Encounter, I have rated this story compelling. Let me know if you agree in the comments, and if not, tell me where you would rank it. Oh, there was just one more thing. A final thought, if you will. Something that came up in the hypnosis session that I thought I'd like to leave to the end. You may have caught it too. You may not. Let's revisit those particular words. Mr. Spencer said, "There is another door. Going through a door, it's an empty room. Two of those green creatures have come with me. There's a picture. It's starting to move on the wall." And then he said, "I wonder how they get the pictures." Mr. Spencer was a policeman. He was an intelligent man. He would have had a good idea about how TV shows, movies are produced, cameras. What did he see? Did he see something that he knew could not have been filmed by any cameraman? How do they get the pictures? Is it possible aliens are walking among us, hidden from our sight, watching us, recording us? Could they be recording you right now? Thanks for watching.